Can you imagine if I started this video off by taking a swing at one of these dudes? Not on your life, Jack. Trees are one of the greatest things this planet has ever produced. They look good as hell, they provide resources for plants and animals alike, and best of all, trees literally eat the pollution humans put in the air and shit out the thing we need to breathe to stay alive. This right here is made of carbon that comes from this right here. And as we continue to pour carbon dioxide into the atmosphere like it owes us money, it's very obviously in our best interest to try to keep our forests as fat and happy as possible so they can continue cleaning the environment that we are constantly polluting. Unfortunately, we're not doing that. If trees could talk and I asked them about people, I imagine I'd have to bleep a lot of it out.
How would you like to have someone and you?
Oh dear.
Despite being our absolute boys for the past 385 million years, giving us shade and shelter and sticks with a little Y at the top that would be perfect for a slingshot, we are destroying our forests in what can only be described as an act of self-sabotage. To make matters worse, we are doing the overwhelming majority of deforestation in the humid tropical forests that store the most carbon dioxide per square inch and are home to the widest variety of plant and animal species. And it's not just cutting down trees. The most popular way to clear land so it can be used for agriculture is to set it on fire and just burn it all down at once. Sure, it releases a ton of gnarly and dangerous gases into the atmosphere and destroys the habitats of forest creatures, but it's way faster. And while fossil fuels are the #1 driver of climate change, deforestation is a pretty close second. And they actually work together as a sort of pincer movement to ruin our chances at maintaining a livable planet. It's like trying to stop Wayne Gretzky while pulling your goalie. It's just not gonna work. It's Wayne Gretzky.
Gretzky shoots, score! Gretzky moving ahead, score!
And would it shock you to hear that at the helm of this rampant deforestation are the massive multinational food and consumer product companies that we know and love? Oh shit, is this dude trying to say capitalism is bad in a YouTube video? And look, I get that it's been a little done, but one, it's worse than you think, and two, there are actually some steps we can take to try to correct the literal fire sale that's going on in the world's tropical forests. They're getting burned for coffee, beef, cocoa, and a whole bunch of other etceteras, but today let's take a look at one of the biggest destroyers of tropical forests, especially for products that Americans buy, a little thing called palm oil. Hi, I'm Rollie Williams, a guy with a climate science and policy degree, and more importantly, an axe safety certification from the Boy Scouts that's literally called a totem chip. And this is a video about deforestation. Welcome to Climate Town. Alright, so palm oil is the most prolific ingredient that people have never heard of. It comes from the reddish-orange fruit of the oil palm tree. You crush it, process it, and now you've got palm oil, which is in f***ing everything. It's in brownies and toothpaste and shampoo, you name it. You can find palm oil in roughly half of all the packaged items in your grocery store. And it's not because palm oil has rich parents or a great agent. Palm oil is in everything because it's an incredible oil. It's got a high smoke point, which makes it good for frying, it's semi-solid at room temperature like butter, and it's shelf-stable for long periods of time. Palm oil makes ice cream melt slower, it makes cookies taste creamier, it makes lipstick smoother and soap more bubbly, and it does it all while being relatively unknown. Palm oil is basically a middle-aged Swedish man who writes all of America's pop music. And that's not a joke. It's this guy. He's written 27 #1 hit singles for artists like Taylor Swift, The Weeknd, and Ariana Grande.
I kind of only try to write as good
good of a song I can write.
You can also just cook with it, and it now accounts for 40% of the world's vegetable oil, which is impressive on its own, except for it's producing that oil on just 6% of the cropland. Each hectare of oil palm can yield you 3.5 tons of palm oil. Canola oil is a deep second place with less than a ton per hectare. And to answer your question, a hectare is like if a football field was just over 300 feet wide. I didn't know what a hectare was either. I live in the US, I deal mostly in acres. We can use a hectare to acre conversion of 2.5 to 1. And much like crude oil, you can also break palm oil down into a bunch of different derivatives with different characteristics, and there are now 3 billion people across 150 countries using some version of palm oil. But palm oil is not a new phenomenon. It's native to West Africa, where it's been used for centuries. But then businessmen from Europe and later the US found out about it a few hundred years ago and started sending it back home. And when I say businessmen, I mean men who are in the business of colonizing and are generously willing to make it everybody else's problem. The company that would become Unilever started planting their own palm oil trees in Africa in the early 1900s to serve the growing demand for delicious margarine and disgusting, but that's not the point, soap. The soap palm olive is actually called that because it was a mixture of palm oil and olive oil, palm olive. Easy. They used to have like 30 seconds to name stuff back in the day. None of this Google it or Palantir. You know, you're good at making burgers, you're the Burger King. If you make cars and your name is Ford, your cars are called Ford. It's easy. Up until the 90s, Americans imported a steady and small amount of palm oil for cooking and consumer products, but all of that was about to change. After a slew of health concerns with lard and tropical oils, the US and Europe went wild for partially hydrogenated vegetable oils found in margarine and its branded cousin, Crisco, described here as the absolutely new product. Wow, it's new? I'm sorry, I shouldn't go too hard on them. Back then, new stuff came out like once a decade, and the last absolutely new thing was f***ing planes. So yeah, I could see how they were kind of jacked for it.
No other shortening has Crisco's exclusive all-vegetable formula.
Women who cook to please men cook with Crisco.
Like Mom taught us, we always use Crisco.
But then they found out that those partially hydrogenated vegetable oils have a little thing called trans fats in them, which are probably very, very bad for you. So what did they do? They can't go back to butter or lard. They needed something new. Not absolutely new, that's too far. Just new in that it's already been around and can newly be considered healthy.
Vitra Long Fractionation Palm Oil, 100% cholesterol free, helps reduce bad cholesterol.
Long Fractionation Palm Oil, heart-friendly.
Over the next decade, producer after producer embraced palm oil as they ran away from artificial trans fats like the second most famous running scene from the Rocky movies. And I know what you're thinking, isn't that the most famous running scene from Rocky? No, that was from Rocky 2, where they just did the exact same thing, except this time he was being chased through the streets of Philadelphia by hundreds of rabid children. Oh, yeah! And then in the mid-2000s, palm oil got another major boost when the US and Europe suddenly realized that they use a ton of gasoline. In fact, they had structured their entire society around it. And then they also realized that despite using a lot of gasoline, they don't themselves produce a bunch of oil or gas. Bummer. So President Bush announced a bold new plan. They would make a massive push into biofuels, which is basically taking crops we grow in America like corn, fermenting them, and then using the resulting ethanol as fuel. Bush set a goal of reducing our gasoline demand by 20% in a decade and signed a bill that required the US to produce 36 billion gallons of biofuels every year by 2022.
It's a big deal.
And a couple of years after the Bush plan, Europe announced a renewable energy directive that included a pretty similar biofuels initiative. But there's only so much agricultural land in the US. The ag industry was obviously thrilled with the artificial demand for turning food into fuel, but now the US would need to find a replacement for all that food that would now be exploded a few feet in front of drivers across the country. And you'll never believe what they used to replace it. But the problem with Europe and the US demanding so much palm oil is a pretty classic one. We can't actually grow oil palm here. they only grow in tropical climates, just like coffee and bananas and a bunch of other things we really like. Back in West Africa, international corporations were great at coercing local populations into forced labor, but they struggled to force the people there to plant and grow oil palms in exactly the way they wanted to. So instead, they turned to Southeast Asia, specifically Malaysia and Indonesia, where they could use the highly profitable, highly abusive plantation method, which you might remember as something the US mostly stopped doing right after we got rid of slavery. By 1940, Malaysia was exporting more palm oil than all of Africa. And by the end of the 20th century, Malaysia was the dominant palm oil exporter, followed by Indonesia, and then pretty much no one else anywhere close. But when the world lined up to demand a monumental increase in palm oil production, they all turned to Indonesia, a country with 6 times more land than Malaysia. And Indonesia delivered. In 1990, they produced 2 million tons of palm oil. By 2000, that number was 7 million tons. And last year, Indonesia alone produced 45 million tons of palm oil, accounting for more than half of all palm oil production in the world. The thing is, a lot of that palm oil growth was absolutely devastating for the environment. Yeah, when Indonesia wanted to make 20 times more palm oil than they used to, they also had to find the land to do that. Take a look at this tropical forest. Do you notice anything? That's right, underneath all of this crap is a ton of land. Good eye. All there is left to do is burn all this other shit down and voila. But unfortunately for all of us, Indonesia also happens to be home to some of the most important carbon sinks in the world: primary tropical forests and tropical peatlands. Unlike your typical forest, where a lot of the carbon is stored above ground in the form of big tree, like right here in the beautiful Armstrong Redwoods in sunny Northern California.
It's been 1 week since you looked at me, cocked your head to the side and said I'm angry.
Anyway, unlike these towering above-ground forests, peatlands are basically swamps. So instead of plants dying and then decomposing on the forest floor and sending their carbon up into the atmosphere, in peatlands that dead material gets consumed by the swamp, where it's held underwater and can't fully decompose. That carbon is then trapped in the swamp, where it builds up in layers over millions of years. Apparently, if you give it a couple 100 million years, that peat could turn into coal, and then we'd burn it all in about 5 seconds. So while peatlands are just 3% of the land on Earth, they store twice as much carbon as all the world's forests combined. Think about peatlands as the absolute last places we should be developing, because they are so useful at combating climate change, and all we have to do to maintain them is to not f*** with them. And they're not like this tantalizingly available agricultural land. Peatlands are swamps.
I didn't get no sleep last night. I've been staying up all night just thinking about this alligator.
But of course they're not really open. I mean, they're open in the way that North America was open when the white European settlers showed up. So if you're looking for a bunch of cheap land that's not currently being occupied by dudes with guns, tropical peatlands are a pretty good option. All you gotta do is dig massive ditches to drain the water, then cut the trees down, then wait a little bit for the swamp to dry out, and then light the whole thing on fire. And that's exactly what they did all over Southeast Asia. By 2015, over 7 million acres of peatland in Malaysia and Indonesia had been converted to industrial oil palm production, up from well under 1 million in 1990. And all that carbon that used to be peacefully preserved at the bottom of the pool is now getting swept up into the atmosphere like that terrifying broom scene from Fantasia. The deforestation has gotten so bad that the tropical forests of Southeast Asia, which are one of the 3 major rainforests in the world, are not only no longer carbon sinks, but are now net carbon emitters, spitting out more carbon dioxide each year than they're able to absorb. And I really wish it didn't get any worse. I really do. But it does. Because these forests are home to both indigenous populations that are being forcibly removed from their ancestral homelands, and incredible biodiversity that is being permanently killed off. Rhinos and tigers and elephants and f***ing orangutans, look at them. Millions of years hanging on trees, looking confused as hell, and then we wanted Oreos, and in a couple of decades they're almost entirely wiped out. Millions of years. My God, we're doing this so fast, and we don't even like this land. It's the fucking swamp. I saw a quote that called it human hell, orangutan heaven. We can't even let them have our hell. Sorry, boys, our soap just wasn't bubbly enough. All right, you may be feeling like all is lost here, and I just want to put this in context for you. Palm oil is just one of many products that we are destroying our rainforests over. Ranchers in Brazil are still illegally torching huge sections of the Amazon rainforest to make room for cattle, and Brazil lost 10 million acres of natural forest in 2024 alone. Myanmar and other countries continue to lose giant sections of their tropical rainforest to the timber trade, soybeans, the list goes on. Okay, that actually made this a lot worse. Hey, sorry about that, guy. Okay, yes, the problem is bad and global, but would it help to hear that this is happening because massive corporations buy from shady companies in the developing world to keep their expenses low and their profits high with no regard to how wasteful they're being? And now that I say that out loud, it doesn't help. And it also doesn't help that a major way agricultural companies keep their expenses low is by underpaying and abusing their workers. Forced labor is still rampant across the globe, and deforestation operations are no exception. Okay, but what about the journalists and activists getting murdered for trying to oppose abuses around deforestation in agriculture? Okay, that's still worse. What was the point of this section? The point is that these are not unknown problems. Pretty much everyone agrees that it's a good thing to try to save the rainforest. The archetypal tree hugger has been a known quantity for so long that it's become a go-to character choice for a sitcom writer who's run out of time and has a script due in the morning.
If I'm occupying the tree, they can't cut it down.
Well, this is my home. I live here.
So, you're a tree hugger?
Damn global warming. Aha!
And it's not even just this kind of character, or even all of these. There are real organizations that have been out here for decades trying to prevent massively wealthy corporations and their suppliers from mowing down forests whenever they want. It's obviously an uphill battle, but let's go back a couple of decades to see if a bunch of NGOs could get the better of some multinational corporations. Place your bets to the early 2000s! Now in 2004, I had never heard of palm oil. I looked like this, and my number one problem was that no one would kiss me because I was a full foot shorter than everyone else my age. I wasn't doing shit, but a whole bunch of nonprofits were already sounding the alarm loud style. You got Greenpeace staging protests, you got the WWF coming off the top rope and he's down. Sorry, that's the World Wildlife Fund pressuring producers. You've got our partners on this video, Rainforest Action Network, cranking out detailed deforestation reports. The political pressure on palm producers was palpable. Paul, I assume someone watching this, his name is Paul, I'm talking to you. So in 2004, they fixed palm oil forever with the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. That's right, the RSPO, hell yeah! They created a board of directors and they came up with a list of guidelines that the palm oil industry would follow to be considered sustainable. Things like operating legally, respecting human rights, and above all, protecting the environment and peatlands. As companies like United Plantations and Wilmar International became compliant, they could proudly claim RSPO certification for their palm oil. What an amazing solution. Except for a couple of tiny problems.
It's been 1 week since you looked at me.
The RSPO board has 16 seats, and 12 of the seats went directly to industry participants, like companies that grow oil palm, companies that process palm oil, and food companies. Now that's not necessarily a problem. If those companies use their power to hold each other accountable, that would be awesome. Unfortunately, that's not really what happened. Since these stakeholders were mainly interested in saying their palm oil was sustainable, the 4 seats filled by conservationist NGOs were fighting an uphill battle. In 2009, when the RSPO was considering including the emissions involved in burning down rainforests as part of their sustainability calculation, the initiative was voted down. Instead, they would consider implementing voluntary measures to encourage producers and buyers of palm oil to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Awesome. The agreement itself is full of loopholes and blind spots that palm producers could use to avoid the regulations altogether. According to Friends of the Earth, a company could certify a single plantation and then apply that to all their product. A company could also just purchase peatland that had been intentionally burned just prior to 2005 and claim that was sustainable. According to a report from the Environmental Investigation Agency, evidence indicates that in some cases, auditors are colluding with plantation companies to disguise violations of the RSPO standard, which probably wasn't all that hard, considering the auditors themselves were contracted and paid for by the same companies they then evaluate.
5 days since you tackled me.
If a palm oil company did burn down protected forest land, the RSPO couldn't really do jack about it. International groups published reports on several RSPO signatories burning down protected forests with little to no repercussions. The RSPO is a voluntary organization with no regulatory teeth. What did we think was going to happen? So if the continued draining and burning of Indonesia's tropical peatlands was any indication, the first decade of the RSPO seemed more like a smokescreen than an actual fix. But fear not, friends, for a real solution was on the horizon. Something that could fix the palm oil crisis forever. And I will tell you all about it. But first, a ad? The internet is a great place for watching full movies in 90-second clips and finding out which one of your high school friends joined a pyramid scheme, but it's not a great place for blindly believing everything that hits your newsfeed. Luckily, there's Ground News. Ground News is an independent news website and app specifically made to break you out of the algorithmic echo chamber. It scours the web for global news and breaks down each reporting source for factuality, ownership, and political bias. Let's look at RFK Jr.'s recent decision to remove all 17 members from the CDC vaccine panel. We got over 140 sources covering it, with 36% leaning left, 43% center, and just 22% leaning right. Left and center outlets seem generally concerned with scientific integrity and the vaccine skeptics RFK Jr. put on the new panel. Right-leaning publications, on the other hand, have focused on this being RFK Jr.'s revenge against the COVID scamdemic or biased panelists, despite not technically citing any evidence. Interesting. With Ground News, you can get the full picture, and with the Vantage plan, you get unlimited access to all of this. So click the link in the description or just scan this delightful little QR code, and you, yes you, will get an exclusive 40% discount on the Vantage level subscription. And it can all be yours for just $5 a month at ground.news/climatetown. That's ground.news/climatetown. What a deal. And we're back to save the rainforest. Not me, obviously. I'm just reading about this stuff. Other people did it, and here's what they did. It takes two to tango, and it takes an official government ban on clearing natural forests and peatlands, as well as an official promise from palm oil producers to really clean up their acts to solve the palm oil problem. In 2011, Indonesian peatland destruction had gotten so bad that Indonesia was the world's third largest greenhouse gas emitter, right behind the US and China. And if you believe in so-called climate change, you might be tempted to think that even though Indonesia is just one country, the atmosphere that's getting all that extra CO2 is in actuality the same atmosphere that every other country uses. So the international community decided to step up. Sorry, just Norway decided to step up. After some international pressure over their insane carbon emissions, the president of Indonesia and Norway hammered out a deal in which Norway would agree to pay up to $1 billion to Indonesia to support their efforts to stop deforestation to stave off climate change. So on May 20th, 2011, Indonesia dropped the hammer with a moratorium on deforestation covering between 150 and 175 million acres of primary forest and peatland. Not only would this solve the palm oil problem, but other industries that cut or burned Indonesia's protected wilderness would be similarly out of luck in the deforestation department. And not to be outdone by the Indonesian government, big palm oil producers led by Wilmar International realized that they also had to get serious. So they signed on to another four-letter pledge, this time called NDPE, which stands for no deforestation, no peatlands, no exploitation. Awesome, problem solved. And this time protecting the peatlands is right there in the name. Plus, they're not gonna exploit anyone's human rights. Perfect. No forced labor, no child labor, what's not to like? Except for a couple of small problems. Number one, you remember that moratorium we were so excited about? Well, it wasn't quite as airtight as you'd hope. Apparently, the map of protected Indonesian land was drawn in pencil and would regularly get erased and then redrawn, except for with more and more protected forest reclassified as up for grabs for palm oil and other developers. And it wasn't like a couple of accidental mess-ups. Greenpeace charted over 10 million acres of peatland and forest that suddenly found itself out in the cold. Well, not cold, hot, out in the hot, out in the hot, suddenly found itself out in the hot, whatever, you get it. And number two, that whole no deforestation, no peat, no exploitation is awesome as long as they stick to it. And in 2015, just a few years after NDPE was established, this happened.
Fires have been burning here in Riau province for more than a month.
Raging wildfires in southern Sumatra as thousands of people are falling ill from smoke inhalation.
Cara diam-diam, yang punya lahan itu.
Slash and burn forest clearance for palm oil companies creates the choking haze.
This is deep peatland. It's now burning underground.
Yeah, Indonesia had the worst wildfires NASA has ever seen. 6 million acres of forest burned, with peatland accounting for half of that area. And because peatlands represent tens of thousands of years of previously stored carbon, fires were able to rip through up to 60 meters of carbon-rich soil, spewing out thick smoke that's visible for hundreds of miles. Researchers estimate that during those terrible 2015 fires, Indonesia was emitting more carbon dioxide every day than the entire US economy. And I cannot stress this enough, peatlands do not naturally burn. They are swamps full of water and carbon, okay? The only way they burn is if somebody physically digs trenches, drains them, cuts them down, and then intentionally torches them. And the reason people do that is almost always for agriculture. So despite our best moratoriums and roundtables and our best sounding efforts, the critical carbon-storing tropical forests and peatlands of Indonesia have been sacrificed at the altar of palm oil. In a few short decades, palm oil production has taken ancient carbon-rich forests that willingly store our emissions for free and jammed all that carbon right back into the air we breathe every day. Plantation firms now control an estimated 12% of Indonesia. And if you're hoping maybe they've had enough, they're still burning down more rainforest and peatland every year. And remember, they're not doing it recreationally, they're doing it to meet the global demand for palm oil at any cost. It is a vicious cycle, and even if you don't realize it, there are 3 billion of us that are part of it. But maybe there's something we can actually do about it, maybe? Okay, now I realize this is starting to feel a little too for flinching, where I say, maybe we can solve this, and then proceed to say all the reasons why only an idiot would believe we can solve this. But my friends, there is some daylight here. The RSPO and NDPE didn't fix everything forever, but we did learn that when the pressure's on, the industry is at least willing to acknowledge its involvement and even adopt commitments about deforestation. It took hundreds of thousands of people emailing and posting and signing petitions, and thousands of activists protesting and locking down corporate headquarters and exposing scandals and doing investigations and generally getting a ton of media exposure. And that genuinely shifted the landscape. This shows once again that there's strength in these relentless grassroots campaigns that call out brands like PepsiCo and Mondelez, but the next step is to get past all this greenwashing and collusion and sidestepping that have doomed these campaigns in the past. The gains are often slow, but people just like you coordinating with NGOs is critical. And I don't want to get all technology will save us, because we've been crossing our fingers for years, and the best tech has been able to manage is generating a bunch of shitty pictures and making Google search way worse while burning a bunch of coal. But the fact that we now have satellites constantly monitoring every square inch of the planet is creepy. But it's also a powerful, creepy tool for groups like RAN and the Tree Map to use to catch illegal deforestation operations sooner. For the first time, NGOs were able to indisputably show that major brands including Lay's potato chips, Olay products, and even my dear sweet cup noodles, which I genuinely thought were cuppa noodles, but apparently they're just cup noodles, were being made using illegal palm oil. And despite taking several L's in the 2000s and 2010s, NGOs and a growing number of grassroots activists have been able to use this new technology to successfully shame corporations into acting right. In 2024, both Nestle and Procter & Gamble were informed by Rainforest Action Network that their products contained illegal palm oil, as evidenced by this satellite image of an Indonesian wildlife reserve. Do we have footage of them receiving that news?
I'm shocked to find that gambling is going on in here.
You're winning, sir.
Oh, thank you very much.
Anyway, after getting caught in the act, both multinational brands have suspended sourcing from the suppliers responsible, which I mean, feels like a step in the right direction. And after years of consumer pressure, major brands are starting to invest on the ground. They're putting resources into real-time forest monitoring and mapping their forest impact, and even working directly with local governments, regional environmental groups, and smallholder farmers. Whether they're doing this out of the goodness of their own heart, or in an attempt to maintain their reputation and comply with some future regulations is anyone's guess, but their motivation is less important than the outcome. So, one thing we can do is basically cyberbully these complicit brands with some simple, reputationally damaging campaigns. Right now, our partners on this video, Rainforest Action Network, are targeting Mondelez, the company that makes delicious Oreo cookies and a bunch of other snack foods. Mondelez is a massive and powerful corporation that could easily use its buying power to force producers to comply with laws when it comes to sourcing palm oil. Instead, Mondelez seems mostly focused on making as much money as it can at the expense of all of this stuff. Rainforest Action Network has organized a grassroots campaign that includes a petition linked below, as well as a list of demands, and they are prepared to go hard at Mondelez for the foreseeable future. Do yourself a favor, check out their campaign, link in the description. People becoming aware and disgusted by what these companies are doing is a huge win, particularly if they follow it up with some kind of targeted action. Corporations are really sensitive to their images, and they hate being painted in a negative light. Oreo briefly had a mascot named Middleman, who I guess was like the physical embodiment of the middle of an Oreo.
Oh! Please don't fiddle with the Oreo middle.
But Middleman, you gotta eat the frosty cream middle first.
Oh! Then go ahead and fiddle with the Oreo middle.
'Cause there's not a better middle you can fiddle with.
Yikes! When they realized how creepy Middleman was, they dropped his ass like a ton of bricks. Truly, corporations cannot stand looking bad. They want everyone to think of the Keebler elf as a nice guy handing out cookies, and not as a little maniac who breaks into your house in the middle of the night, smacks you around, and then burns the place to the ground. If corporations want to exploit land for profit, it seems reasonable to me that we hold them accountable for how their actions impact the globe. Another helpful strategy is to give indigenous people more influence over forest policy. With the help of indigenous activists, the Indonesian Forest Ministry was able to prevent 160,000 acres of tropical forest from being cleared by palm oil producers, which should come as no surprise considering the world's indigenous populations are often the most effective protectors of forests and other ecosystems. And also, the world's wealthiest nations need to step up here. To whatever the opposite of their credit is, the US and Europe used to be covered in trees. Wow, look at all those forests. And look at them go! We deforested the shit out of 2 continents for agriculture and urban development. There even used to be way more of these big ass trees in California, but then we cut them down, all while telling people they were actually being preserved. It is insane for the rich and developed world to destroy their own carbon sinks, and then turn around and expect developing countries to grow sustainably with no major support from the ridiculously wealthy countries and companies that are demanding their product. Luckily, the EU is trying to make some kind of amends. They recently passed deforestation legislation that'll be applied at the end of 2025 and will require operators to collect the geographic coordinates of the land where the commodities they place on the market were produced. It's the strictest standard for deforestation yet, and even though it may not work perfectly or have all the kinks ironed out, it's a good example of the kind of policy we need to see more of all across the globe. And while it is a way better idea to just leave our old growth forests alone, like way better, the cool thing about destroyed forests and peatlands is that they can grow back if we give them the chance. You can rewild a forest and re-wet peatlands and start the process of returning our planet to a livable, stable ecosystem. And all that growth sucks carbon out of the atmosphere, and then maybe we can actually do something about all this climate change. Life tends to find a way, as long as humanity doesn't find a way to f it up first. And remember, this is not just about Indonesian palm oil. We've been deforesting the planet for centuries, but now we're running out of time, and we need to get our collective act together before the next big cash crop pops up and the company that sells us laundry detergent wants to clear cut the rest of the tropical rainforest to make our soap 6% more bubbly. And that's the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you liked what you saw, I encourage you to head on over to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/climatetown. You get access to deleted scenes, outtakes, clips from our live show, and even access to the controversial Climatetown landline, a real phone that sits on my real desk, and you can call it, and I will really answer, more than 50% of the time. Does it freak people out? Absolutely yes. People subscribing to us on Patreon is the thing that makes these videos work, so if you like what you see, check us out at patreon.com/climatetown. I just wanted to say thank you so much to Solar Punk Farms for letting us come out and shoot part of our video here. It is a beautiful farm here in Guerneville, Northern California. They are a queer-run regenerative farm and climate education space. They're doing some amazing things out here. Follow them on Instagram. Back to you, Rollie. Hey, thanks, Rollie. We've also got a podcast called The Climate Denier's Playbook if you're more into the listening part of climate change, and we've got a Climatetown newsletter if you're more into the reading part of climate change. Both are top shelf, both are free, and both are available now using the link in the description. We also have 100% cotton shirts made entirely in the Carolinas, and plastic-free hats with a special cork and bamboo brim that's really nice and comfortable. And that's the end of the episode. Thanks again for watching. Okay.
Okay. I have not tried marijuana. I have never used it at any time.
Did you hear that pop?
Goodbye.